This is a story my grandpa swore was true. When my grandpa was a young man, he worked for the railroad. He made good money, and being he wasn't married yet, he had a nice car for that time, and on the weekends, he liked to go out with his friends. He was headed back on a Friday and was running late to a dance that night, so he took a shortcut on a pretty curvy road. The sun was setting, and he was headed west, and when he broke up over a hill, he was speeding, and suddenly breaking over the top of a hill, he became blinded by the sun, but in the last second, could just make out that someone was standing in the road. He swerved to miss the person, went off the road, down into a ravine, and slammed into a tree. He must have passed out because the next thing he remembered was hearing the voice of a young man saying, Mister, are you alight?" Grandpa said his head was splitting and his knee felt like it was on fire, but he was alive. The kid helped him out of the car and gathered up Grandpa's duffel bag and helped him up the bank and sat him on the ground near the road. He could see an old house nearby, and Grandpa asked the kid if that was his house. The kid answered, "Yay." It was then that Grandpa noticed the boy had a hair lip and spoke with a strong lisp. He was a pudgy boy, pale and red-headed. He looked friendly enough, and when Grandpa asked him if he had a phone at his house, the boy shook his head and said, "No phone." Grandpa asked if his folks were home, and he said, "Nope," and he said he didn't know when they'd be back. Grandpa then asked how far the nearest neighbor was, and the boy said it was the last place he'd passed with the long white fence in front. Grandpa thought back and figured it had to have been 6 miles or so. The boy said, "You can come to Mahu's." So the boy helped Grandpa limp up the long driveway up to the run-down old house. The house was cold, even though it was a warm June evening, and Grandpa could see there was no central heating or even a wood stove, but there was a large fireplace and hearth in the kitchen. Grandpa asked if the house was always so cold, and the boy said, "I'm allus cold." Grandpa said, "If you go get some wood, I'll start a fire." The boy came back with a big armload of wood, so Grandpa started a fire, and the wood was pretty dry, so in no time there was a big fire going, and the boy stood so close to it, rubbing his arms soaking up the heat, that Grandpa said to him, "You better be careful, buddy. You're going to get burned." The boy only repeated, "I'm allus cold." Grandma asked the boy, as he was hungry because he had some sandwiches in his bag, but the boy said he'd already had his supper. Grandpa ate his sandwich while the boy still stood in front of the fire to close for Grandpa's comfort, but he didn't say anything more. He looked around the house, and it seemed like there hadn't been anyone there for a long time. It started getting dark, and the boy turned from the fire and said, "You can sleep in my bed. I'll keep the fire going." And Grandpa says, "I don't want to put you out of your bed. And are you sure none of your neighbors won't be passing by? Maybe he could get help with his car." The boy said, "Nobody ever comes up this far. They're scared of the ghosts." Grandpa said that shook him up a bit and said, "What ghosts?" The boy replied, "Everyone says there's ghosts here, but I've never seen 'em. The only thing I'm scared of is nightmares." Grandpa said, "You have nightmares?" The boy said, "Yep. Every night. Same dream. A giant hog chases me and tries to eat me, but I wake up." Grandpa asked him, "Did you ever get chased by a pig in real life?" And the boy said, "Yeah." He had picked up a sow's baby by its leg and shook it so it was squealing, and the pig chased him and knocked him down, and he got bit up by the sow pretty bad. Grandpa said, "Well, that's probably why you have the nightmares." The boy just nodded his head. Grandpa said he was getting pretty tired and was hurting pretty badly, and said thank you for letting him sleep on his bed, which was over in the corner of the room near the fireplace. The boy said he'd keep the fire going and watch over while Grandpa slept. Grandpa said he woke up with a start from the dream he had. He had the same dream the boy told him about. A huge sow chasing him, and he woke up just as the sow was about to attack him. The boy was still sitting there, in front of the fireplace. There were only coals left, and the sun was coming up. Grandpa limped outside to take a pee off the porch, and he said he could hear a tractor in the distance. He limped over the field and waved his arms until the farmer saw him. He sat and waited because the farmer was a good distance away. He asked the farmer if he could pull his car out of the ravine, and the farmer said yes and asked if Grandpa was all right. He told him yes, and Grandpa rode on the wheel well of the tractor till they got to the place where he went off the road. The farmer asked kinda in astonishment him, "When did you run off the arm?"